now available in paperback and e-readers. Isis, Revenge of the Cyber Goddess. The goddess next door takes on the threat of a deadly digital diva driven to destroy the world in this action-packed, all-new Isis series adventure. Get Isis, Revenge of the Cyber Goddess featuring a bonus pin-up and the other 2 books in the Cyber Goddess saga at online bookstores everywhere today. Better get the coleslaw, y'all, because we're having us a barbecue. I took a minute to read Absolute Batman and Absolute Wonder Woman, and I absolutely was not impressed in what was in between the pages of Absolute Batman or Absolute Wonder Woman's first issues, and when I read in Absolute Batman in Absolute Wonder Woman was just an absolute mess that shows how desperate DC Comics is in order to try to save a dying comic book brand. Now, Absolute Batman and Absolute Wonder Woman are supposed to be the response from DC Comics to the what they believe to be successful Ultimate Spider-Man and Ultimates comics from Marvel Comics, in which they're going to reimagine these iconic DC Comics characters the way Marvel wanted to reimagine many of their characters in the Ultimate line. And ultimately, what is presented in these Absolute comics is an absolute disappointment to me, and an absolute disappointment to me because these reimaginings just feel completely uninspired, and they feel completely uninspired because the writers really didn't take the time to go out here and really give us a solid structure for these characters or really go out and establish a solid mission. No, we don't get the 3 critical questions asked that every screenwriter and comic book writer like myself has to answer before we put fingers to the keyboard, which are: who is the main character, what do they want, and why should we care in these Absolute comics? No, what I read in these Absolute comics basically reminds me of many of the really poorly done Image comics that came out in the 90s, where, yes, we got a lot of big, flashy pictures, but sadly, there was no substance to the story. And since there was no substance to the story, there's nothing really there that you can build a structure on to really develop this character over a period of time. And that's my big problem with these Absolute comics so far, is that, yes, you get this flashy image of an Absolute Batman who's supposed to be about 6 feet 9 or 6 feet 10 inches tall with a huge hulking body, and a cape that basically is like Dr. Octopus's arms or something like that. Again, these are great gimmicks that would get people's attention for a moment, but sadly that you need more than a gimmick to basically create a character that makes people care. And that's one of the things that has been a problem over at DC Comics with Jim Lee, is that they basically are still trying to use Image Comics approaches as related to comics, when that whole model of storytelling just really doesn't work well, and it doesn't really work well for any comic book storyteller, because, yeah, you can come in with some flashy art and get people's attention for a moment, but if you want to get and retain customers for a long term, what you really need are people who can go out here and write compelling stories, and that was what I didn't see in Absolute Batman or Absolute Wonder Woman as related to the structure of their story. And again, it's that weak structure that's the main problem with both of these books. I mean, Absolute Batman gives us a Batman that has no mission to go out and declare a war on crime due to the tragedy that he suffered from the death of his parents. And Absolute Wonder Woman is not even the Wonder Woman character. She's a completely different character, a daughter of Zeus who's been sent to hell and is basically a woman who was raised in hell. That's not Wonder Woman at all, the same way Absolute Batman isn't Batman. And That's what makes these reimaginings really weak reimaginings, because they have no solid structure that gives these characters a mission or a direction. And because they don't have a mission or a direction, I don't really see these books really lasting very long in terms of story, because one of the things I know as a writer who's been writing for over 25 years is that if you don't establish your mission in the first book, then you're not going to be able to go out here and build anything on that world later on. That's going to be a major problem for this whole series, is that they didn't do a good job of establishing the mission, and that's something you have to do in the first 3 books, because that's was something that I've learned from my experience, that the first 3 books are essential, because that basically is how you're going to lay out the structure for your entire run. You're going to lay out the mission for the character in the first book. You're going to start to develop the whole purpose for the character in the second, and by the third, you're going to have a overall direction, and you're also going to lay out your story paradigm for that character by the third book. So readers get a sense of who this character is, what they want to do, why we should care, and also we get to see the world being built. But I don't see any of that framework really being set up for the Absolute books, and that's where I see serious problems for the Absolute books in the future. And I don't see these books lasting very long, because if you don't have solid structure in the beginning, what happens is you're not going to be able to build that world, and everything is just going to fall apart structurally. And that's the big problem with the Absolute books. They're not really built to last. No, like many of the old Image and Wildstorm books, they're meant to shock you for a moment, get you to run to the comic book store on your feelings, or speculating on the value of these books. And that's not good for the overall comic business. No, what's really good for the comic business is a book where the writer basically goes out and thinks out this character's powers, this character's mission, this character's direction, and then starts laying the building blocks later on for the character's rogues gallery, and builds up the relationship between the characters and their rogues and the challenges that they face. And when I look at these Absolute books, they just feel and look like books that came out in the 90s. Again, 90s books, they were not very good. A lot of those 90s books, especially from a lot of the indies like Image and many other companies, they were just flash in the pan books that got your attention for a moment. But when it came time for that writer to put together a second or third issue, this is where the structural issues start to show how weak the foundation is, and the entire comic basically winds up falling completely apart. It falls completely apart because the writers didn't take the time to go out here and really think critically about the mission of these characters, what they want the characters to have, a purpose and a direction to go in. I mean, these are things that I had to sit down and think about when I was doing all of the SJS Direct Universe books, like the ISIS series, the John Haynes series, and the Esteem series, and even books like those that I'm doing right now, like Spinsterella Goth Girl Summer. I've got to sit down and really think about where I want these characters to be before I put fingers to the keyboard. And I need to make the first story very strong, because the first story is the one that's the one that makes the first impression on the reader. Moreover, the first story is the one that sets the course for the entire series. And when I look at the entire Absolute books, I don't see books that can go the distance as related to storytelling. I don't see these the characters in the Absolute world going 3 to 5 years, or even going 2 years at best. I mean, the whole structure of the stories is completely off. Yes, you get some gimmicks like Batman using a shotgun filled with batarangs on Alfred. Yes, you get some flashy images of Wonder Woman as related to her being all tatted up and ready to, again, be this just demonic princess. But that's, again, flash, and it doesn't really give you a mission, doesn't really give you a direction. Yeah, it looks really cool, but it doesn't really draw you in. and give you a story to care about. And that's where I see the editorial weakness over at DC, because these absolute books, again, they are just absolutely terrible all around. But you'll have many on Comics YouTube want to hype it up, and many comic fans want to hype it up because they're basically desperate at this point, because they see the comic book industry looking to falter and basically on the brink of collapse. So they're looking for anything to win, but that's not how you win as related to the business of publishing. No, you win in the business of publishing by going out here and understanding what direction you want to go in and what direction you want your stories to go in, because it's your stories that are going to sell to the reader. Yeah, they may see a cut character for a minute, like we did with the Ultimate line. I mean, Marvel, basically, when it created the Ultimate line, thought they were going to create a world that would appeal to new readers, but sadly, because many of the writers of the Ultimate line didn't really focus on maintaining their structure, the entire Ultimate line fell completely apart within less than 5 years, and after all the hype, the Ultimate line ultimately fell completely apart and basically faded into obscurity, just like it's doing right now. The Ultimate line is struggling right now for the same reason, because the books are just not structured, very well. And with the books not being structured very well, it's hard to wrap the form of a story around them that really draws readers of all ages in. So when I looked at these two absolute books, again, I was not impressed at all. No, all I saw was, again, just really poor structure as related to story. I saw just, again, lack of character development and just a whole lot of gimmicks thrown at us to overcompensate for the lack of storytelling. And it was just, again, a big disappointment, because what DC, again, is now presenting itself as, after a decade and a half of Dan Didio running the company into the ground, now they're turning into Desperate Comics. And again, Jim Lee going back to what he knows, which is old archaic 90s models, instead of going to try to learn a completely different approach to storytelling. Because what DC, I believe, and Marvel need right now, if they want to save comics, if that's their plan, you've got to go out here and stop using these approaches from the 90s, because these 90s approaches are the thing that torpedoed comics. Because as readers of comics started looking at the lack of storytelling and the lack of character development, this is what made a lot of people walk away from comics after the speculator bust came around in the 90s. And in 2001, what basically imploded both Marvel and DC Comics was the lack of a competent editorial being in place to put checks and balances in as related to storytelling, or an editor-in-chief in place to again synergize these books to make sure that they flowed into each other, so that each of the books, basically, while they have their own stories, you can still be able to pick up every book and it be an entry point, and everybody can basically just follow the story. That's what's missing over at Marvel and DC as related to their storytelling. And an absolute line, again, where you have people using the failed approaches of the 1990s, that's not going to, again, get people interested. Yeah, you may sell a first issue and get a lot of sales on a first issue, but that's not going to get people to stay on the series up until the 12th or the 24th issue. And that's the other problem with comics, is that that many publishers are focused on gimmicks and not focused on the foundation of solid storytelling that basically made comics sell big in the 1980s. Because what made comics sell big in the 1980s was really a heavy focus on storytelling, a focus on making sure that there were compelling stories and well-developed characters. And sadly, I didn't see that whole focus on writing with either of these absolute books. All I saw was the same flashy shock and awe gimmick model of the 1990s that basically has been rendered obsolete here in 2024. And in 2024, the reader wants a better story model They want better character development. This is why so many people are going to manga, because manga gives you compelling stories and gives you compelling art, and they don't go out here and try to slip things in like the Black Barbara Gordon in Absolute Batman. Again, another token diversity race swap, and where they slip it in, again, passively giving you a new Batman, but give you the same social justice narratives. And the whole thing with both of these characters is that they don't feel like the original characters. Yeah, I get you want to say that Darkseid has done something to the world over there, but these characters just don't have the core heart of the original characters, and they feel like completely new characters. Now, if you wanted to do an Absolute world, you could have did something like Wildstorm and just create a new world of new characters, but don't go out here and try to force old characters into new premises that don't fit them. That's another issue I had with these Absolute books. I mean, these Absolute books are another absolute disappointment and still show me how the comic book industry still doesn't get it, how many in the comic book industry still don't get that they're making the same mistakes over and over again. Now, the rest of the world calls this insanity, which is doing the exact same thing and expecting a different result. But many in the comic publishing industry don't see how it's your whole approach and model to storytelling is basically impeding your ability to get sales. You're basically, again, using the same old approaches and not understanding that this approach isn't working. No, the whole Absolute storyline, again, feels like old Image comics again. And again, old Image comics, they would get your attention. I remember the days of Youngblood and Wildcats and all these other books. Yeah, they get your attention for a minute. But once you start really reading these runs, they start to fall apart as you get further down the line because of the lack of structuring, the lack of rogues gallery, the inability to go out here and know how to structure a character as related to developing a full character transformation arc over an overreaching arc. I mean, these are techniques of craft that sadly many comic writers aren't being taught, and this is why you have these runs that go flash in the pan, whether it be with Marvel and DC Comics or indies like the Rippaverse or many other indie books. A lot of books wind up falling apart because the writers don't really take the time to go out here and structure their stories so that you can go from one story arc to the next and the world continues to build, the characters continue to develop and grow. And you learn more about the characters, you learn more about the obstacles that they have to face, more about the challenges that they have to overcome. I mean, this is the work that a writer has to do, and they have to make plans to do that work before we even put fingers to the keyboard. Because I know when I'm working on ISIS series books, my whole character transformation arc for the character is, again, here's a woman who was a teacher, but now she's a student learning in the 21st century, and all the books fit that theme of learning in the 21st century. Even though you're an immortal, you still have a lot to learn. With the John Hayes series, it's about this guy who's a loner who has to learn about working with people and learning how to work with people in situations to overcome challenges, that he's not alone. And with the Esteem series, it's all about this woman growing in Christ after giving her life to Christ. And again, all those stories, again, fitting into overreaching arcs that help you see the character learning and growing. And you have to make those plans to do that in the first 3 books. In the first 3 books, you have to really set up your story, set up your direction, and set up how this character is going to do things. And that kind of care is not being done with modern comics, and that's why the sales are in the place that they're in, because it's hard to, again, set this up because a lot of writers don't know how to do it. And then as you're trying to do your run, what happens is these books get canceled so quickly that you really can't see these characters, again, really start to develop and grow, because once you start to form a relationship with the character, the book gets canceled. And again, I look at this whole situation with absolute Batman and absolute Wonder Woman, and again, they're an absolute disappointment, and they're an absolute disappointment that shows me that there's sadly no hope, no change for anything in the comic book industry, because many people in the comic book industry continue to think that doing the exact same thing is going to lead to a different result. And again, ultimate versions of DC characters are no different than ultimate Marvel characters in that, yes, you've got this whole new looking version in this new looking world, but sadly, even though these characters look flashy on the outside, they don't have the substance of their original counterparts. And since they don't have the substance of their original counterparts, it's hard to really connect with these characters, and sadly they wind up not being able to get traction because of the, again, inability of the writers to, again, create a great character. And again, they want to make these characters basically be their versions of Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman, but they would have been better off if they had their own names and their own stories, and maybe they would have been able to gain some traction had you made this their character all its own, because I don't see absolute Batman or absolute Wonder Woman as Batman or Wonder Woman. I just see them as knockoff characters that may be gone from the minds of most readers sooner rather than later. Now, if you want to pick up my first full comic in the SJS Direct Universe, John Haynes at Death's Door, you can find that comic on Lulu.com right now in paperback, or you can pick up a Kindle version for just $3.99. And my first digital comic, Esteem No Good Deed, is available on Kindle for 99 cents right now, or you can pick up a paper copy in the back of the Esteem series book, Esteem Blast from the Past. And if you want to check out the books of the SJS Direct Universe, you can find the books in the ISIS series, the Esteem series, the John Haynes series, and other books like those in the Spinsterella trilogy or my vampire novel Eternal Night. You can find all those books in paperback and Kindle format on Amazon.com, and you can also find them at other online booksellers like Draft the Digital, Google Play, Barnes & Noble, and big box retailers like Walmart and Target. And if you'd like to see me be able to make my next comic, or you want to see me be able to pay for the covers for the books, or support other independent comic creators, Kickstarters, or other crowdfunding projects, you can drop a donation to the Patreon, the PayPal, or the Cash App by clicking the links in the description box. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe. Now available on Lulu. John Haynes at Death's Door. The man who rules the world takes on the Greek god of death in this action-packed, all-new John Haynes comic book. Get your copy of the first John Haynes comic at Lulu.com today. Now available in paperback and Kindle Unlimited, Esteem The Sands of Time. It's action and adventure in ancient Egypt in this terrific teen time travel romance. Get your copy of Esteem The Sands of Time at your favorite online bookseller today. Support Black-owned and Black-operated digital broadcast media. www.niceradionetwork.com. Nice Radio Network, broadcasting 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.